Silent Night, Deadly Night. Psychological horror story. It was a cold December in Pine Hollow. Snow covered the small houses and streets. People were happy because Christmas was near. Sarah was not happy. She missed her sister Emily, who died last year. Sarah was a journalist. She worked hard but felt lonely. One day, her boss gave her a task: write about the history of the old church in town. The church was big and dark, with tall windows and a broken bell. People said it was haunted, but Sarah didn't believe in ghosts. Inside the church, Sarah found a dusty room. It smelled old, like wet wood. There was a desk with papers and books. On the desk, she found an old journal. The name on it was Father Matthias. Sarah opened the journal. The pages were yellow and the writing was messy. She read, "The darkness grows stronger. Only the ritual can keep it away. Do not let the seal break or the silence will be gone forever." Sarah frowned. What did it mean? She flipped the pages and saw drawings of chains, a mask, and a strange symbol. At the end of the journal, there was a map. It showed a hidden crypt under the church. Maybe this is a good story, Sarah thought. She decided to follow the map. Downstairs, Sarah found a locked door. Rusty chains covered it. On the wall, red paint said, "Do not enter." Sarah laughed nervously. "It's just an old room." She whispered. She pulled the chains until they broke. The door creaked open. The air was cold and smelled like dirt. Inside was a small room with stone walls. In the middle of the room stood a box. It was black and shiny, with the same strange symbol from the journal. Her hands shook, but she opened it. Nothing was inside, or so she thought. A shadow moved in the corner. Sarah jumped. "Hello, is someone there?" There was no answer. The room felt darker now, like the walls were closing in. Sarah grabbed the journal and ran out of the church. She didn't notice the footprints in the snow behind her. Footprints that weren't hers. Something had followed her. That night, Sarah sat at her desk in her small apartment. The journal was open in front of her. She could not stop thinking about the crypt. Who was Father Matthias? What was the seal? And what did the strange box mean? "I need to know more," Sarah said to herself. She looked at the drawings in the journal again. There was one that showed a mask. It had sharp edges, hollow eyes, and a creepy smile. Under the picture it said, "Beware the Silent One." Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a message from Mrs. Grayson, the old town historian. Sarah had called her earlier to ask about the church. The message said, "Do not touch anything in the crypt. Stay away, the Silent One brings death." Sarah rolled her eyes. People love their ghost stories, she said, but still she felt uneasy. She tried to sleep, but strange dreams woke her up. In the dreams, she was back in the crypt. She saw shadows moving and she heard footsteps behind her. A voice whispered her name, soft but cold like the wind. When she woke up, her heart was pounding. She turned on the light. On her desk, the journal was open again, even though she had closed it before bed. Did I forget to close it? She wondered. The next day, Sarah decided to go back to the crypt. She told herself it was just for the story. But deep down, she wanted to know the truth. When she reached the church, the air felt colder than before. Snow crunched under her boots as she walked. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. She climbed down to the crypt. The chains she broke yesterday were still on the floor. The door was open, just like she left it. When she stepped inside, the box was gone. "What?" Sarah whispered. She looked around the small room. Her flashlight made shadows on the walls. Something caught her eye, a mark scratched into the stone floor. It was the same strange symbol from the journal. Suddenly, Sarah heard a noise behind her. She turned quickly, but no one was there. "Hello?" she said, her voice shaking. Then she saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the light. It wore a mask, just like the drawing in the journal. The hollow eyes stared at her, and the creepy smile seemed to grow. Sarah froze. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. The figure tilted its head as if it was studying her. Then it took one slow step forward. Sarah screamed and ran up the stairs. She didn't stop until she was outside, her breath showing in the cold air. The figure did not follow her. But she knew it was still there, watching, waiting. Back in her apartment, Sarah locked all the doors and windows. She sat on the floor holding the journal. "What have I done?" she whispered. But it was too late. The Silent One was awake. The next morning, Pine Hollow was quiet, but something felt wrong. Sarah walked to the coffee shop in town, her head full of fear. She wanted to tell someone about the masked figure, but who would believe her? At the shop, people were talking about a strange death. Mr. Baker, the man who played Santa at the Christmas market every year, was found in his house. He was sitting in his Santa chair, but his neck was cut and blood covered the floor. "They say it looked like someone used a Christmas ribbon," one woman whispered. Sarah felt sick. She thought about the figure in the mask. Was it connected? She hurried to the police station and found Ethan, the young deputy. He had always been nice to her. "Ethan, something bad is happening," Sarah said. She told him about the crypt, the journal, and the masked figure. Ethan frowned. "Sarah, that sounds crazy. Are you sure you're not just imagining things?" "I'm not," Sarah snapped. "I saw it and now people are dying." Ethan sighed. "Okay, I'll check it out, but you need to stay away from that church, understand?" Sarah nodded, but she knew she couldn't stop. She had to find out what the Silent One wanted. That night, the town had another death. A teenager named Jenny was found in the park hanging from a Christmas tree. Her face was frozen in fear, her hands clutching a broken ornament. Now the town was in panic. People took down their decorations and locked their doors. No one wanted to celebrate Christmas anymore. Sarah read more of Father Matthias's journal. The priest wrote about a dark spirit called the Silent One. It was a punishment for the sins of the town, he said, every Christmas. The spirit needed to be kept away with a special ritual. But if the ritual failed, the Silent One would come and punish those who celebrate without shame. Sarah's heart raced. It's my fault, she whispered. I broke the seal. I let it out. She heard a noise outside her window and froze. Slowly, she pulled back the curtain. There it was, the masked figure stood on the snowy street, staring up at her window. Sarah's breath caught. It didn't move, it just stood there, silent and still, like a statue. She backed away from the window and grabbed her phone. She called Ethan. It's here, she said. The Silent One, it's outside my apartment. I'm on my way, Ethan said. Minutes later, Ethan knocked on her door. Sarah let him in, shaking. It's gone, she said, looking out the window again. The street was empty now. Ethan looked serious. Sarah, I think you're in danger. This thing, whatever it is targeting people. You need to stay somewhere safe. But Sarah shook her head. No, Ethan, I need to stop it. I have to finish what I started. She showed Ethan the journal. There's a way to seal it again, she said. But I need to go back to the crypt. Ethan stared at her like she was crazy. You want to go back there? Are you out of your mind? I don't have a choice, Sarah said. If I don't, more people will die. Ethan sighed. Fine, but I'm coming with you. That night, Sarah and Ethan went back to the church. The town was dark and quiet, as if everyone was too afraid to even turn on their lights. When they reached the crypt, Sarah felt the cold air again. The chains were still broken, and the door stood open. Inside, the walls were covered in scratches. The symbol on the floor was bigger now, glowing faintly in the dark. Ethan held his flashlight and gun. What do we do now? He asked. Sarah opened the journal to the ritual page. We have to say these words, she said, and then we need to close the seal with blood. Blood? Ethan asked, looking nervous. Before Sarah could answer, a low sound filled the crypt. It was like footsteps, slow and heavy. The Silent One was here. The heavy footsteps echoed in the crypt. Sarah's hands shook as she held the journal. Ethan aimed his flashlight into the darkness. Who's there? Ethan shouted, his voice firm but shaking. The Silent One stepped into the light. Its mask gleamed, and its hollow eyes stared at them. The air felt colder, as if the life was being sucked out of the room. Stay back, Ethan warned. He raised his gun and fired. The sound of the shot echoed, but the Silent One didn't stop. The bullet hit the wall behind it. The figure kept walking, slow and steady. Ethan, stop, Sarah yelled. You can't hurt it. Ethan grabbed her arm. We need to get out of here. But before they could move, the Silent One raised its hand. The flashlight flickered and went out. The crypt was swallowed by darkness. Sarah heard Ethan gasp. What's happening? He whispered. A sharp, scraping noise filled the room, like nails on stone. Then Sarah felt it, cold fingers brushing against her arm. She screamed and ran. She didn't know where she was going, but she climbed the stairs as fast as she could. Ethan followed, his breathing heavy. When they reached the church above, they slammed the door to the crypt shut. Ethan leaned against it, panting. What the hell was that? He asked. It's the Silent One, Sarah said. It's getting stronger. It's feeding on the fear in the town. Ethan looked at her. What do you mean, feeding? Sarah showed him the journal again. The Silent One grows stronger by making people afraid. Every death, every scream, gives it power. If we don't stop it, it will kill everyone in Pine Hollow. Ethan stared at her, his face pale. How do we stop it? Sarah looked at the journal. The ritual, she said. We need to finish the ritual Father Matthias started. But I don't know if it will work. Ethan nodded. We don't have a choice. Over the next few days, the Silent One's killings grew worse. A mother was found in her kitchen. Her Christmas cookies burned to ash. A little boy vanished, his sled left in the snow with bloody handprints. The town was falling apart. People boarded up their homes and turned off their lights. No one dared to celebrate Christmas. Sarah felt the weight of it all. She knew it was her fault. Every time she looked out her window, she saw the Silent One standing in the shadows, watching her. One night, she and Ethan gathered supplies. They needed candles, symbols, and something to use for the blood sacrifice. As they worked, the power in the town went out, the streets were dark, and the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. We need to hurry, Ethan said. It's getting closer. Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. In the distance, a Christmas carol played. The soft notes of Silent Night floated through the air, but it was wrong. The song was slow, twisted, and haunting. Sarah froze. "Do you hear that?" Ethan grabbed his flashlight. "It's a warning," he said. "We don't have much time." Sarah and Ethan stood in the church, surrounded by shadows. The candles they brought flickered, their weak flames barely lighting the old stone walls. Sarah held the journal tightly, her fingers trembling. "We have to do the ritual now," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were determined. Ethan nodded. He had his gun, but he knew it wouldn't help. "What do we need to do?" Sarah opened the journal to the ritual page. "We have to draw the symbol on the floor with salt. Then we light the candles and say the words in Latin. At the end, we need blood." Ethan looked at her. "Blood? How much?" "Just a cut on the hand," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. They worked quickly. Ethan poured the salt in a circle, following the drawing in the journal. Sarah lit the candles and placed them around the circle. The air felt heavy, like something was watching them. "Hurry," Sarah said, her voice tight. Ethan finished the circle. "Okay, now what?" Sarah held the journal in one hand and a knife in the other. "Stand in the circle with me. Don't step outside, no matter what happens." They stepped into the circle, and Sarah began to read the Latin words. Her voice shook at first, but she kept going. "Tenebras claude, silentium redi, sanguis nostra vinculum est." As she spoke, the ground started to shake. The candles flickered wildly, and the shadows in the room seemed to move. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Sarah, something's happening." The Silent One appeared in the doorway. Its mask glowed faintly, and its hollow eyes stared at them. It stepped closer, slow and silent. "Keep reading," Ethan shouted. Sarah's voice grew louder. "Tenebras claude, silentium redi." The Silent One raised its hand. The candles went out, plunging them into darkness. "No!" Sarah cried. She reached for the knife and slashed her palm, letting blood drip onto the salt circle. The Silent One stopped. It tilted its head as if confused. Ethan turned on his flashlight, aiming it at the figure. "Is it working?" "I don't know," Sarah said. The Silent One stepped forward, its foot crossing the edge of the circle. The salt glowed brightly, and the figure jerked back, its mask cracking slightly. "It's working," Ethan shouted. But the Silent One wasn't done. It raised both arms, and the shadows in the room came alive. Dark shapes with long clawed hands crawled toward the circle, hissing and screeching. "Sarah, what do we do?" Ethan yelled. Sarah's mind raced. She looked at the journal, then at the Silent One. "I have to finish it," she said, before Ethan could stop her. Sarah stepped out of the circle. "No, Sarah, don't," Ethan shouted. The shadows swarmed around her, but Sarah didn't stop. She held the journal tightly and walked toward the Silent One. "This is my fault," she said, her voice strong now. "I broke the seal. I let you out, but I'm going to end this." The Silent One tilted its head again, as if curious. Sarah raised the knife. "You won't hurt anyone else." She slashed her palm again, letting more blood fall onto the ground. The glowing salt grew brighter, and the shadows screamed. The Silent One stumbled, cracks spreading across its mask. Sarah shouted the final words of the ritual, "Silentium aeternum est." The Silent One let out a sound. A horrible, echoing cry that shook the walls. Its mask shattered, and it dissolved into smoke. The shadows vanished. The air grew still. Sarah fell to her knees, exhausted. Ethan ran to her, pulling her back into the circle. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice shaking. Sarah looked around. The church was quiet again. The Silent One was gone. "I think so," she said softly. But deep down, she wasn't sure. For the first time in days, the air in Pine Hollow felt calm. The heavy, dark feeling that hung over the town was gone. Sarah and Ethan stood in the middle of the broken church, breathing hard. The Silent One was gone, and the shadows had disappeared. Ethan helped Sarah to her feet. "You did it," he said, his voice soft. Sarah shook her head. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." The candles had burned out, leaving the room in dim light. The salt circle still glowed faintly, like a soft reminder of the power that had been there. Sarah's hand hurt where she had cut it, but the pain didn't matter now. "Let's get out of here," Ethan said. "This place gives me the creeps." As they climbed the stairs back to the main church, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also doubt. She couldn't shake the memory of the Silent One's hollow eyes and the way it had tilted its head, almost like it was waiting. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The streets were still quiet, but a few houses had their lights on again. "Maybe people feel safer now," Ethan said, noticing the lights. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure if that was true. She still felt like something was watching her. The next day, the town started to wake up. People whispered about how the strange deaths had suddenly stopped. No one knew what had happened, but some said it was a miracle. Others said it was because they had stopped celebrating Christmas. Sarah stayed in her apartment, resting. Her body was tired, and her mind was full of questions. Was the Silent One really gone, or was it waiting to come back? She opened Father Matthias's journal again. There were no more pages about the ritual. But at the very back she found a new drawing. It hadn't been there before. The drawing showed the mask of the Silent One, cracked but not broken completely. Beneath it were 3 words, "It always waits." Sarah's stomach turned. What did it mean? Her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Hey," he said, "I've got some news. People are starting to put up their Christmas lights again." "That's good," Sarah said, trying to sound happy. "I think it's over, Sarah," Ethan said. "You stopped it." Sarah didn't answer right away. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the Silent One was gone forever. But as she looked at the drawing in the journal, a tiny voice in her mind whispered, "Not yet." For now, the town was safe. For now, there was hope. But Sarah knew the truth. If the Silent One ever returned, she would have to face it again. And next time, it might not let her win. Days passed. And the town of Pine Hollow started to feel normal again. The Christmas market reopened, and people hung lights on their houses. Children played in the snow, and laughter returned to the streets. But Sarah couldn't relax. She couldn't forget the journal. The words, "It always waits," haunted her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the Silent One's mask, cracked but not broken. One night, Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the journal. She read the last few pages again, over and over. Father Matthias had written about the Silent One's power. The seal can hold it, but the curse cannot be destroyed. The Silent One will always find a way back, unless... The next line was smeared, impossible to read. Sarah slammed the book shut. "Unless what?" she whispered. Her phone rang. It was Ethan. "Hey, Sarah," he said. His voice sounded calm, but there was something off about it. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. Ethan hesitated. "There's been another death." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What? Who?" "Mrs. Grayson," Ethan said softly. "They found her in her house. It looks just like the others." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. "But we stopped it. We did the ritual. It's gone." Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Sarah, I don't think it's gone. I think it's still here." That night, Sarah and Ethan went back to the church. The crypt was quiet, but the air felt heavy again. Sarah opened the journal, her hands shaking. "There has to be something we missed," she said. Ethan held his flashlight, scanning the walls. "What if we didn't stop it?" he asked. "What if we just slowed it down?" Sarah didn't answer. She flipped through the journal, searching for clues. Finally, she found a page she hadn't noticed before. It was written in faded ink, and the words were hard to read. "To end the curse, one must give their life willingly. The Silent One will take what it is owed. Only then will it be silent forever." Sarah's heart sank. She read the words again, hoping she was wrong. But the meaning was clear. "What does it say?" Ethan asked. Sarah looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Someone has to sacrifice themselves," she said. "That's the only way to stop it." Ethan stared at her. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't," Sarah said. "The Silent One will keep killing until it gets what it wants. And it wants blood. It wants me." Ethan grabbed her arm. "No, Sarah, you don't have to do this." "I do," Sarah said firmly. "This is my fault. I broke the seal. I let it out. I have to end it." Ethan shook his head. "We'll figure something else out. We always do." But Sarah knew the truth. There was no other way. Sarah returned to the crypt alone. She lit the candles again and stepped into the salt circle. She held the knife tightly in her hand. "Silent One," she said, her voice steady. "I know you're here. I know what you want. Take me and leave this town alone." The shadows in the crypt began to move. The Silent One appeared, its cracked mask glowing faintly. Sarah took a deep breath. She raised the knife and pressed it against her palm. Blood dripped onto the floor. "Take me," she said again. The Silent One tilted its head. Then it stepped forward, its hollow eyes locked on hers. As it reached out, Sarah felt a cold hand touch her chest. Her vision blurred, and the world went dark. When Ethan arrived at the church, the crypt was empty. The candles were burned out, and the salt circle was broken. "Sarah," he called, his voice echoing. But she was gone. Ethan found the journal lying on the floor. The last page was blank, except for one new line written in blood. "The Silent One is gone." For now, Ethan stared at the words, his heart heavy. He knew Sarah had saved the town, but he also knew the curse was never truly gone, and he would be ready if it ever returned. Sarah stood alone in the crypt, the cold air pressing against her. The Silent One loomed in the shadows, its hollow eyes fixed on her. Its mask, cracked from the earlier ritual, seemed to glow faintly in the dark. She tightened her grip on the knife. Her hand still ached from the earlier cut, but this time she knew it wasn't enough. Blood alone wasn't what the Silent One wanted. It wanted her. "I'm here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "You win. Just leave the town alone." The Silent One stepped closer, silent as always. Its tall, thin figure seemed to stretch as it moved, shadows swirling around it like smoke. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about Pine Hollow. She thought of the children playing in the snow, the Christmas lights twinkling on the houses, and the sound of carolers singing in the streets. She thought of Ethan and the way he had tried to protect her even when it was hopeless. This was her fault. She had broken the seal, unleashed the Silent One, and brought death to the town. If her life could end it, she had no choice. "I'm ready," she whispered. The Silent One tilted its head as if studying her. Then it raised its hand, pointing at her chest. Sarah felt the cold rush through her body, sharper than any knife. She gasped, falling to her knees, her vision blurred and her heartbeat slowed, her mind filled with strange images. Father Matthias performing the first ritual, the Silent One locked away in the crypt, waiting for its chance to escape. She saw the faces of its victims, frozen in terror and the way their deaths had fed its power. But then she saw something else, light, a faint golden glow breaking through the darkness. The Silent One froze. Its mask began to crack further, pieces falling to the ground, the shadows around it shrank, pulling away from Sarah. "What's happening?" she thought, barely able to speak. Her blood, dripping onto the floor, glowed with the same golden light. It wasn't just her sacrifice, it was her choice to do it willingly that weakened the Silent One. The figure stumbled back, its mask crumbling. The shadows screamed, writhing as if in pain. Sarah looked up, her strength fading. "You can't hurt anyone anymore," she said softly. With one final shatter, the mask broke completely. The Silent One let out a sound, a deep, echoing cry that shook the walls. Then it was gone, vanishing into smoke. Ethan found her minutes later. He ran into the crypt, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Sarah," he shouted. She was lying on the cold stone floor, pale but alive. The salt circle was glowing faintly, and the air felt lighter. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. "Ethan," she whispered. "You did it," he said, his voice breaking. "You stopped it." Sarah smiled faintly, for now. Ethan helped her to her feet, supporting her as they climbed the stairs. The church was quiet, and the stars outside were brighter than ever. "What happens next?" Ethan asked as they walked into the snow-covered street. Sarah looked up at the sky. "We live, we celebrate, and we hope it never comes back." But deep down, she knew the truth. The Silent One was gone, but not forever. For now, Pine Hollow was safe, and that was enough. Weeks passed, and Pine Hollow slowly returned to normal. Christmas came and went, and the town seemed to forget the darkness that had nearly destroyed it. People went back to their routines. The laughter of children filled the air, and the lights on the houses shone brightly. But Sarah couldn't forget. Every night, when she closed her eyes, she could still hear the whispers of the Silent One. She could still see its hollow eyes watching her, waiting. Ethan noticed the change in her. She no longer smiled the way she used to, no longer talked about the future. She would sit by the window at night, staring out into the cold, empty streets. "I'm fine," she would say when he asked. "Just tired." But he knew she wasn't fine. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah sat in her apartment with the journal. She opened it again, hoping to find something that would ease her mind, but the words were the same, the warnings clear. She flipped to the back, where Father Matthias had written the final note. The words that had once been smeared were now clearer, but they sent a chill down her spine. "The curse can never be fully broken. The Silent One waits in the shadows for the day it is needed again. Be ready." Her fingers shook as she turned the page, but then there was something new. A final drawing, one she hadn't noticed before. It was the mask. the cracked mask of the Silent One, but this time it was surrounded by a circle of light. The light was faint, almost like a glow from deep within. Sarah stared at it for a long time. The light. Could it be a sign? Was it hope, or was it just another trap? She didn't know, but she had to find out. She put the journal down and stood up. The air felt thick with uncertainty. A few days later, Sarah and Ethan stood in the middle of the old church, the one that had once held the crypt. They had come to check on it, to make sure the Silent One was truly gone. The church was silent, just as it had been when they first arrived months ago. The salt circle was still there, faint but visible. But something was wrong. There was a feeling in the air, something dark and familiar. "I don't like this," Ethan said, looking around. Sarah nodded. "Neither do I." They walked toward the altar, where the air felt colder. A strange smell lingered, like dust and decay. But it wasn't just the church. It felt like it was coming from deep inside, from the earth itself. "Sarah," Ethan said quietly, "I think we need to leave." But Sarah didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, where something had caught her attention. It was a small crack in the stone, barely visible. But it was there. Her heart raced as she knelt down. She placed her fingers on the crack and pushed. The stone shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment beneath it. Inside, there was nothing but darkness, and then a cold, metal object. Sarah reached in, her fingers brushing against it. It was the mask. Her breath caught in her throat. "I thought it was gone," she whispered. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Sarah, what is that? What's happening?" But Sarah didn't answer. She pulled the mask out of the compartment and stared at it. The cracks had healed. It was perfect again. And as she held it, she felt a familiar coldness spreading through her. The shadows around them seemed to move, growing darker. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice shaking, "it's not over. It's waiting." The mask seemed to glow faintly in her hands, as if alive, as if watching her. And as the church began to tremble, Sarah knew the truth. The Silent One was never truly gone. It had always been there, waiting for its next victim. And now it had found her again.